Good to go. All right, welcome everybody to these September staff updates. We're going to start today off with some awards. And so, Rich, if you could come up here and join us, it'd be great.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good afternoon, everybody. Do I need to be at the mic? For them? At the mic, please. At the mic. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rich Kramer. I'm the Northwest Region Director of the Pennsylvania Game Commission. And today we are presenting an award of appreciation to Anna Branduzzi from the nonprofit organization Green Forest Works, based out of Lexington, Kentucky. Anna is the reforestation coordinator for Pennsylvania and West Virginia. In the spring of 2021, the Game Commission partnered with Green Forest Works to plant 3 state game lands in the Northwest region. Approximately 108,683, approximately, seedlings were planted across 414 acres. Each year, the scale of these projects has grown. In 2022, Anna initiated the largest tree planting project to date with the Game Commission's Northwest Regional Forestry Supervisor, Scott Wolbert. Over 304,242 seedlings were planted across 5 separate game lands, totaling 1,012 acres. 100,550 additional seedlings were planted in 2023. To date, with the help of Anna and Green Forest Works, over 500,000 seedlings have been planted across 1,966 acres in the Northwest region. So please join me in thanking Anna. Anna, please come up. Anna, we're presenting you today with this lovely grouse print. Wow. The nice little plaque there at the bottom. Hopefully your name's spelled correctly.
It is, thank you.
Awesome. And
Thank you so much.
there you go.
Thank you.
And we'll get a photo here a little bit later, but if you wanted to say any words, you're more than welcome to.
Sure. I want to say, since I've been with Green Forest Work and working with the PA Game Commission on these projects for the last 3 seasons, it's been a pleasure working with the Northwest region, the regional forester and the foresters, and they've been so helpful, and they've really saved my back on many occasions, especially with receiving huge seedling orders. And also, in addition, the Game Commission's Howard Nursery this past season gave us over 100,000 seedlings toward these projects, so that was really amazing and helped us stretch our funding even further. So on behalf of Green Forest Work, I'm really grateful to have you guys as really great partners, so thank you.
Okay. We have a program here that gives you some highlights of the Northwest region. Some of you saw this last evening, but not everyone has. So I'm very happy to share it once again. Our Northwest Region office, located in Franklin, Pennsylvania, there's a very nice photograph of it there. We moved to Franklin in 1954. The first region office was built on this site in 1960, and the current office was constructed there in 2012. Here in the Northwest region, we're responsible for managing and implementing all of the Game Commission's programs within the boundaries of the region, to include wildlife protection, wildlife management, habitat management, and public outreach. Some of our wildlife protection efforts and statistics: we have 22 state game warden districts in the region. They work under 5 field supervisors. We have 48 active deputy game wardens working alongside the full-time officers, all working under the region director and 4 region office supervisors in Franklin. In 2022, the officers prosecuted 1,017 cases with a 95.4% success rate. They also issued 793 warnings. Between the 1st of January this year and August 17th, our officers have handled 6,143 incidents. Not the highest incident load for regions, but a significantly higher incident load than what we have been handling in the past. Our supervisors also approved 1,985 call-outs to officers to increase response time to public inquiries. Our wildlife management efforts in the region, in support of both statewide and regional initiatives, we have 7 different staff members assigned to conduct a variety of wildlife management activities. In this past year, in WMU 2F, our staff worked under bear biologist Emily Carollo, who is here somewhere. She went to the bathroom. But she is here. But she trained our staff in collaring bears and how to get this done. And over a period of just 2 days, with the game wardens and habitat employees, foresters, and biologists, they were able to accomplish the entire project's goals in just a matter of 2 days, trapping, I think, how many bears, Tim? 13 bears in 2 days and getting 5 collars out. Really a great team effort. Our staff also conduct a lot of duck and goose banding. Obviously, the Northwest region is a high point place for us for waterfowl. I think we tag or ban the majority of the waterfowl in the state. You can see that one photograph there with all the ducks in the trap. I believe that's at one of the ponds at Pymatuning, yes? Staff banded over 1,200 geese this past year, new captures and 116 recaptures, and that was with the Western crew working in both the Northwest and Southwest regions. We're coming close to meeting our duck banding goals, and in just a few days, Tim was able to meet our dove banding goals as well. We have staff that are heavily engaged in the 2D turkey study. We've got 2 employees that work for this region that are dedicated exclusively to that study. Female turkeys were equipped with GPS transmitters in the winter, and then our employees use this technology to collect data on survival, nest selection, and nest success. Habitat management. We have 6 different land management groups, each with a supervising land manager, and a regional total of 46 habitat management employees working on 11 crews across all 10 counties. With five field foresters, 3 forest techs, all working under 2 assistant regional foresters, conducting habitat work on 67 different state game lands in the region. The overall program is overseen by a partnership between our regional forester and our regional land management supervisor. Jesse Bish here is our land management supervisor. Our regional forester is in Wyoming right now, so hopefully, I'm sure he's having a good time. The habitat management staff maintains 97 miles of roads on state game lands that we open seasonally to increase hunter access to areas that are not easily accessible by foot. The crews also maintained and treated 497 acres with fire in fiscal year 22. That included 383 acres of herbaceous and 114 acres of forest. The habitat management staff manages 290 acres of small grains that are managed as managed dove fields, providing hunters with the enhanced opportunity to hunt doves. And of course, just like every region, we spend a lot of time treating and managing invasive plant species, and that activity occurred on 3,115 acres in fiscal year 22. Habitat management crews hand fell and machine cut 841 acres of forested habitat during fiscal year 22, and the Northwest crews, outside of what Anna and her group did, planted 21,927 seedlings in fiscal year 22. Our forestry staff coordinated work on over 956 acres using the habitat crews, whether it's doing TSIs or crop tree releases, aspen cuts, all sorts of different habitat practices. The forestry staff coordinated work on over 1,460 acres of forest non-commercially during the fiscal year using contractors, with an additional 1,000 acres of commercial timber sale acres also with contractors. The forestry staff coordinated from a variety of different budget sources within the agency the treatment of over 3,686 acres of invasives in forested stands as well. Shooting ranges. The Game Commission manages shooting ranges all across the state. Here in the Northwest region, we have 3 rifle ranges, one located in Erie County, one in Forest, and one in Clarion County. In fiscal year 23, the current fiscal year, we're expanding our shooting range opportunities to 3 additional ranges in the region. 2 archery ranges located in Erie and Lawrence counties, and an additional rifle range in Butler County. Pheasant stalking. 40,291 birds were stalked on over 9,558 acres of suitable pheasant habitat in fiscal year 22. 48 different game lands, you can see them on the map there, and 7 other public properties are stalked across all 10 counties in the region. Our staff, not just our wardens, but all of our staff, engage in public outreach events. We had an American Marten open house at the Northwest Region office on the 3rd of June. We held a junior game warden camp near Polk on July 6th. Of course, hunter-trapper education courses are conducted throughout the year all across the region. And all staff participate in outreach events such as county fairs, Erie Sports and Outdoor Show, and things like that. We try to get staff of a variety of disciplines so that we're able to answer all the questions that the public may have. The Pymatuning Wildlife Learning Center. We've been working on this for quite some time. Jason Amory in the back there has taken the lead on this, and construction should be completed by the end of 2025. Should start soon. This is a rendition of what the building should look like. This is another view of that as well. This is a depiction of the interior of the classroom multipurpose room that we'll have there. And this is a depiction of the museum exhibit area, obviously without exhibits. And of course, people make it all happen. The Northwest Region employs over 100 permanent and limited term employees, as well as almost 50 deputy game wardens, all working towards fulfilling the agency's mission. We also have a really strong history of internships in this region. That picture there with the young lady looking at the screen next to our nation's flag is one of our recent interns. We've done a really good job hiring interns into our forestry positions. We've hired 2 or 3 into habitat management positions, a couple as wildlife management staff, and we even have one of our most recent interns is in the current game warden class down in Harrisburg. And with that, if there are no questions, or if there are any, I'd be happy to field them. If not, we will move on to the next presentation. Any questions? All right. I'd like to welcome Mr. Tim Hoppy. He will be giving the next presentation. Tim's our brand new wildlife management supervisor in the Northwest Region.
Thanks, Rich.
Pardon me, I just need to get used to being behind the screen when presenting. So, thank you for your time. Commissioners, ladies and gentlemen of the audience. Today I want to share an example of a habitat project that we did here in the Northwest Region that Demonstrates our collaboration, demonstrates our focus on wildlife, and also how these approaches are changing the way we do forest management. The title of today's slide was Wildlife-Driven Silviculture. And before we get into the meat and potatoes of the presentation, just want to go over the definition of silviculture, or at least one definition of silviculture. So that is the practice of controlling growth, composition, structure, as well as the quality of forest to meet values and needs. So if we think about values and needs, historically, these values and needs were deeply rooted into timber production, especially from the economical side of things. But if we consider what we're here for, and we consider our mission, that being wildlife, habitat, promoting hunting and trapping for current, future generations, these values and needs take on a whole new meaning, right? This is what we're here for. So in order to dive into this project, we're going to leave Erie County, take a 2-hour trip down to State Game Lands 283. Throughout the presentation, I'm going to give you a brief description of the game lands. We're going to talk about our collaborative approach to game lands planning. We're going to talk about, when we get into these plans, how we use our strategies to deliver goals and objectives, and then talk about how these new strategies are leading the way of how we're looking at things and how we're managing things. So State Game Lands 283 is located in Clarion and Jefferson counties. From a bird's eye view, if we look at this game lands, it's a landscape of forested properties. Just to put it in perspective, 90% of the land cover is forested. And it's a little bit difficult to see, but if you look at the very north border of the picture, the top of the game lands, you can see a little sliver of the Clarion River. So it also is comprised of the Clarion River corridor. Now, this corridor was instrumental in the turn of the century for timber production and movement of forest products. Those logs were sent down the Clarion River into the Allegheny, the Ohio, and ultimately the Mississippi River drainages. The center part of the game lands has a tributary of the Clarion, which is Cather's Run. The game lands itself, deeply rooted in the timber industry. It was actually purchased from Westover Lumber Corporation in 1971. Prior to that, the timber company had practiced pretty much what we would consider diameter limit cutting across the game lands. And we'll get into the legacy impacts of that in a couple slides. So if we look a little bit deeper into the game lands, and this is all part of the comprehensive planning process, but if we look at the forest cover, similar to the landscape, we're at 94% forest cover on a 3,000 acre game lands. It's almost split 50-50 between deciduous and coniferous forests. However, if you look at the photograph, this is what our conifer forests look like down along the riparian areas of Cather's Run. So you have a lot of stems, but very little structure in the understory or midstory. Similar to that, our deciduous forests, primarily oak species, are going to be on our ridge tops and on the southern aspects. These two lack really any understory or midstory. So they lack structure, and when we think about wildlife habitat in forested areas, we're looking for structure. A lot of the reason for this was, again, the legacy from the harvest in the late 60s and early 70s. The large trees that you see there we're just under the diameter limits of that harvest. And if you were just to focus on those larger trees and kind of ignore the smaller ones there, these stands are understocked. They don't leave us a lot of management options with what we're traditionally used to, practices that we're traditionally used to following. Again, taking a little deeper dive into this forest information, we look at stand ages. And 93% of this 3,000 acre game lands is in that 81 to 125-year-old age class. So again, these are the things that we have to look at when we're getting into management plans. Landscape, species composition, land cover types, old land use, the fact that this game land sits within the Clarion River corridor, the fact that it is adjacent to an important bird area of Cook's Forest, all of these things are taken into account in our comprehensive management planning process. All these details and a whole host of others with species range maps, with acquisitions, with soil types, important bird, important mammal areas, all of these are important parts. However, if we look at the most important part of this process, it's our collaborative approach and the fact that regional staff from wildlife, forestry, land management, and our GIS staff all sit down at the table. They spend time in the field, and they further evaluate the needs of wildlife and the future needs of conservation for this game lands. Now, these game lands plans are a roadmap for the next 10 years for the management of this game lands. And if we consider everything that we've discussed so far, this team sits down, and because of landscape, because of forest age, because of the history, the team approach to this game lands is to manage for late successional conditions. So what does this mean? What does this look like? Well, basically, this is the vision that we have for this game lands. Now, this isn't going to occur in the next 10-year cycle. This is something that is going to occur over decades, if not much longer. But this is the approach based on all of that information, that this is the vision for the game lands. What are these components to late succession? Well, we're looking for these large diameter trees. We're looking for gaps in canopies. We're looking for diversity from herbaceous vegetation to mid-story to understory to large snags, cavity trees. We also want to see large woody debris on the ground in different decay classes to allow for small mammals, to allow for turkey nesting sites, to allow for a host of forest interior birds utilizing this habitat across the game lands. But how do we expect to get to those late successional conditions with what we have today? Historically, when we look at forest management with the Game Commission, and let's just say prior to 2012, 13 is when this project was started. But at that time, our major tool that we used for forest management was commercial timber sales. If we had an area, or when we had an area where we needed non-commercial work done, we had to tack that onto a commercial timber sale, and that was a penalty block. So whatever it would cost a logger to cut that non-commercial sale came out of the timber sale itself. That's just how we had to do business at that time. So again, going back 10 years, thinking about our vision, we didn't have the tools to get there, but we still wanted to go after that goal and vision. So the planning team had to sit down and think about how could we meet these objectives with what we knew and what we had at hand. So in doing that, we needed to start developing some strategies, because whether we had the money or not, we still needed to lay down the plan. This is where that team aspect and that collaboration comes into play, because then all of a sudden you have new ideas coming across the table. So we looked at our strategies, and we were really focusing on, in this case, the cavities and dens and the wildlife attributes that were in those stands. Because the trees that we wanted to be the legacy for the late succession were definitely the trees that were commercially valuable, but we couldn't touch those, because that would just be putting us 100 years backwards. So as the team started sitting down and coming up with strategies, many of these strategies weren't new, and many of these strategies we utilize every day in forestry operations. Obviously, we wanted to maintain mass production, both hard and mass. That's not new. We do that every day. Improve structure and species diversity. Pretty common practice. We want to build more shelves in that pantry so we can hold more critters. We want to develop that herbaceous layer, understory, midstory. Species diversity, just thinking we all have a soft spot in our hearts for oak trees, but in bad mass years, where's the value? So we need to make sure we're keeping diversity in those stands. Again, all stuff very common. Where we start to skew away from the common practice is in strategy 3, and that was ensuring adequate tree cavities and dens. Now, any foresters in the room, they know that this is something we've always done, and we'll get to those details in the next slide. But where this changed was having an intensive examination and clearly marking existing and potential cavity trees in those stands. The next was to take those identified trees and make sure we were doing the same management to those cavity trees as we would a gun barrel straight oak tree or cherry tree, because it's those wildlife attributes that we're concerned about as an agency. So we wanted to release the crowns of cavity trees to increase vigor to ensure those trees made it through the life of the stand. And this was a hard concept at first for some people to think about. The next was to retain trees that exhibited broken top trees, whether it blew out from wind event or snow, or a tree that had a broken limb stub. And what that would do is that would allow rot to allow a cavity to form. And those were trees that traditionally would have been some of the first to be weeded out of the stand through the majority of the way we looked at timber at that point. So it was really an exercise in identifying and clearly marking out some of these wildlife attributes. And then the last one, again, something that is a result of many of our practices, was just allowing some of that dead wood to be left on the ground to start rot and allow places for small mammals and also seedlings to take hold. So I mentioned that, this idea of retaining cavity trees, it's not new. It is in our forest standards, our forest manual that we've been practicing for decades. In those standards, we list in an intermediate type cutting, a thinning, that we want to make sure we're retaining at least 3 small hole dens and 1 large hole den. A large hole den is just a hole 5 inches or larger in diameter. One of those for every 5 acres. So this is something we've always taken pride in and always tried our best to do. However, it was through this sit-down planning process that we dug into literature, and we found that there was a project called the Missouri Ozark Forest Ecosystem Project. I think this study is laid out for like 100 years, and they actually went through and were looking at a lot of the same ideas and same characteristics that we were looking into. And one of the interesting facts that we pulled out of that was they looked at their foresters as they marked and retained cavities, and they were doing that in their daily routines as they were marking timber and doing a lot of the management that we're typically used to seeing. But what they found was when they actually had their foresters go out and just focus on retaining these cavity trees, they ended up finding twice as many cavities as they would by incorporating that into another forestry practice. So we took that to heart. Now they also took it one step further. After they had marked their trees in the logging operations, they actually sacrificed these den and cavity trees to examine them. And they would bisect the tree with a chainsaw and look at measurements of these cavities. And what they were finding was that after examining over 54,000 trees, that only 13% of those estimated from the ground actually led to a cavity that would have had a chamber big enough for a chickadee to fit into. So why does this matter? Well, it matters because when we did this exercise at what we affectionately call the squirrel spot, forestry staff did their timber marking, they reserved their trees just like they did in Missouri. And then after the fact, we came in and we did a subset, an 8-acre section where we just individually looked for these potential and existing cavity trees. Similar to what Missouri found, we found 42% more in that small 8-acre parcel. So it just, again, kind of just made it clear that in areas where we were really looking for cavity tree protection, we needed to do that extra step. When we think about that 8 acres, and we did it twice, and we caught 42% more of these cavities, we ended up with 6.5 cavity trees per acre, which is well above the 3 acres or the 3 trees that we need. However, when you think about the 13%, suddenly we just went from twice as many to less than 1 tree per acre. So this was an eye-opener for our staff. Still, the problem remains, how do we do it? Because at that time, we didn't have the financial situation that we find ourselves in today. Again, we were left with commercial timber sales being the only avenue to try to get this done. However, on that 3,000-acre game lands, we didn't have commercial stands where we could have penalty blocks. Luckily for us, we had a new foreman that had a history of being a private logger and was very comfortable and confident with tree felling. And after our foresters had marked the stands, reserved the trees, he reached out and was willing to have his crews come in and do this work, and they had the training and confidence needed. Those first 2 stands were 76 acres, and it was a collaborative effort between the habitat management crews and several of our forestry staff coming together in order to try to make this goal happen. Since that time, habitat management crews have taken the squirrel spot as a nucleus and started to spread that practice out across the game lands, totaling over 308 acres that the crews have done. In addition to, over the last 10 years, there has been about 650 additional acres that we have been fortunate enough, because of our financial situation right now, to be able to hire contractors to come in and do these types of practices. Not only on this game lands, but we're spreading this out into other game lands across the region. The photograph with the marked trees there shows an example of I believe it's a tulip popple with a dead limb stub. The blue marks that it is a reserve tree to stay there. The G is for a girdle. I believe that was a white ash emerald ash borer, but the decision there was that we were looking at that potential cavity tree is the value there. And we were sacrificing the white ash to be a girdle tree as a potential snag into the future, and just to demonstrate our focus on wildlife here, not timber. So although this approach may seem trivial to some, especially coming from the Wildlife Agency, it has changed the management styles across the region. Our CMPs are providing a foundation for landscape scale habitat projects and conservation efforts. Our current funding sources are allowing us the latitude to do these projects that we would have never dreamed about being able to pull off before. What the Squirrel Spot did for staff was to show us that we can now allow habitat conditions, wildlife needs to really steer the management focus, not necessarily being so worried about hitting a target basal area, a stocking chart, just gave us more options. So with that, I hope that you can see the value in these changes, in that how our collaborative efforts, our reliance on each other in different perspectives have allowed us to put more of a wildlife focus into what we do, in the latitude to allow for experiments and the focus on wildlife. And again, that's what we're here for. We're here for the wildlife, habitat, promotion of hunting, fur taking for current and future generations. So with that, take any questions that you guys might have. So we've heard a lot about our regional forester and him being in Wyoming. That is his oldest daughter. She is now a freshman in college, actually up here in Erie. And that's their dog, Belle, who is a squirrel dog. And if I'm being honest with everybody, that dog has probably just as much credit in all of this as anybody else, because, like I said, we like oak trees and we get stuck on oak trees, but that dog on bad mast crop years shows you the value of diversity. And when you go in diverse stands and there's other food resources, well, that's where the squirrels are. So I'd like to say it's all us, but there's lots of ways to get information. Yep.
Tim,
Yeah.
just right here. Over here.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Squirrel.
Yeah. Yeah, it's echoing. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. That was very informational. Are other regions doing this? Maybe it's Brian to answer as well, to pick up this type of management practice, because it's very much what we stand for.
And I'll let Dave field that one.
I would say yes, variations on the theme depending on what species they're focusing on and what specific techniques they're doing. So each place, like this one was driven for squirrels, there's other places where they're really focusing on things like snowshoe hares and really diving into those techniques and working with Emily Boyd on what those need to look like. Other places they're focusing real hard on woodcock and working with the biologists there. So this collaborative approach with the species-specific experts, with the forestry and habitat staff all together, that attitude or that culture, I would say, is really now pervasive across the agency.
Great. Thank you.
And to have the finances to do it, you know.
Thank you for the presentation. I was just wondering, are you planning on publishing about the results that you found?
So we really haven't talked about that. And I guess The only thing there, in order for it to be peer reviewed, we would have to obviously bolster a study design to be able to pull that information out. So one thing we run into, we always want to have good results to fall back on, right? I guess the short answer is we still won't have the resources to study every single thing we do, but we're relying on research from like the Missouri Ozark Project to give us that information to, as practitioners, to say, hey, here's a set of data and information to be able to pull from and say, hey, it's not exactly, but this is how it applies. And we're going to apply it here. So that's where we're at right now. It would be certainly something that if we explored that, we would need to get with forestry and also Emily Boyd and figure out, are there other answers, other questions that we need to be looking at? Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Mark Duda with Responsive Management up next.
Perfect. Good afternoon. My name is Mark Duda. I'm the Executive Director of Responsive Management. And I was back there counting on my fingers how many times I've presented to the commission before. It's always been in Harrisburg, so it's pretty interesting to come up here, and it's such a great idea to go around the state like that. So very much appreciated. Yeah, I think it's my 7th time that I've presented to you all, but it's been pre-COVID. So anyways, it's good to see everyone. Commissioners, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Much appreciated. I've got about 20 minutes to present probably about 4 hours worth of presentation. So even though I'm from Virginia, I do talk pretty fast. But I want to talk to you about a study that we did for you. It's brand new. It's a study on Pennsylvania residents' attitudes toward wildlife management. And it was an array of subject matter. We looked at attitudes toward elk, toward bear, toward deer, turkey, really the whole range. But I'm only going to present sort of the highlights today. The report is a couple of 100 pages report in terms of size, but there's a lot in there. I'm going to present a lot of the statewide results with a few of the unit results, but I want you to be assured that if you see something on a statewide basis, that it's also in there on a unit basis as well. So is this the clicker here? I'm afraid to touch things and mess it up. That's not it. But before it here, can I just use this? That one forward? Perfect. Want to start off with who helped from the commission on this. We had a whole lot of people. Josh Johnson, Chris Rosenberry, and Corin Jagnow, who you all stole from us from Virginia. I don't know how many years ago that was. That was 13 years ago? Seems like yesterday. So they still miss her at the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources. But she's great and really appreciate everything she's done at this study, as well as Josh and Chris. So I'm going to present sort of just the highlights of it. I'm going to tell you a little bit about who we are. I think most of you know who we are by this point, but in case there's anybody new, I want to talk about the study methodology. And then I'm going to talk about some of the key takeaways on how Pennsylvania residents think about hunting and trapping, their attitudes toward deer, their attitudes toward elk, bear, their attitudes toward the reintroduction of the American marten, after having done this study, they had so much information. It just seemed like everybody focused in on that one series that we did on that. And some really interesting results there. And then we're going to talk about their awareness of wildlife diseases, and then what the public thinks of you all. Do they know who you are? Do they like what you're doing? Do they think you're doing a good job? So we save that till last. Then we can certainly answer any questions. I can be here as long or as short as you want me to. So a little bit about who we are. I've been doing this for 33 years. So if you think I've been around forever, I probably have. I've had the same job for 33 years. Same wife, same kids. But over that time, we've done about 1,000 projects and surveys on how people think about wildlife conservation. I mean, everything from manatees in Florida to salmon in Alaska to issues in Arizona and Maine and everywhere else. And over that time, we've done work in all 50 states, 15 countries worldwide. For every single state fish and wildlife agency, we do work for all the NGOs, from the Recreational Boating and Fishing Foundation to the National Shooting Foundation, Nature Conservancy, Sierra Club, the full range. And then we also do a lot of work with the manufacturers. It's a terrible job to have to do work for Yamaha Motors and do research on what people think about their boats. And then we also do work for universities. I like to say we did work from A to Z, but it's really from Auburn to Yale. I haven't done a study for any university that starts with a Z yet, so we need to find somebody who does. But everything in between, from Clemson to Colorado State to Duke, Penn State, Michigan, Stanford. So we do a lot of work literally from the agencies, which is my primary love, all the way down to universities. And I think that's important because when I present to you some of the results, I want you to feel comfortable with them and I want you to feel that we're credible. And so let me talk a little bit about the study methodology. When I was thinking about this, you think about these slides and what you're going to say, and this was a big study. It was a big, expensive study because it was wide-ranging. We did it on a wildlife management unit by wildlife management unit. It wasn't just statewide. We talked about a lot of stuff to a lot of people. But I thought about this one, I thought, well, even if you paid me $1 million, which, I wish you did, but you didn't, I wouldn't have done it any different. This is as high-quality research as you can get. And I want to talk a little bit about this because I think it's important, because I'm going to give you some numbers. 30% say this, 20% say this. This is declining, this is increasing. And, anybody can go out there and ask a few questions, but you want to know if it's real. And so, as I said, we do a lot of work for the universities. One of the contracts we have is with the University of Virginia system, in this case, Virginia Commonwealth University. And over the years, 99% of our work is natural resource work, wildlife conservation, forestry, water quality. But we do some political polls. We're not political in any sense of the imagination, but you've heard of Quinnipiac poll or this poll, and they say he's going to win or she's going to win or whatever. But the mark of a good survey is are they right? And so I want to present to you a couple that we did. Again, we don't do a lot of these, but it's always good. And I do these for this very reason. When I talk to you, I want you to feel comfortable with our numbers. In 2020, we predicted in the President Trump, Vice President Biden election, the presidential election in 2020, we predicted that Biden would win Virginia by I think, 8.5 points. He ended up winning by 10. So we were within 1.5% of predicting that election. Now, anybody can tell you who's going to win afterwards, but try to do that a week before. A year later, just a year later, we had a Republican sort of person who nobody knew, somebody who had just lost, a Republican candidate lost the year before by 10 percentage points. But as we went through and used the same methodology in our survey, it was becoming apparent that this newcomer, his name was Glenn Youngkin, was going to win. And we predicted that election within about a percentage point. So if you can do that with survey research, I think you're doing a pretty good job, and I think we can be comfortable with telling you that X percent of Pennsylvania residents think this or that. So I just wanted to just do that because I think it was important. But in terms of what it is that we did for you, it was a pretty major study on what Pennsylvania residents think about a variety of issues. This was a general population study, 18 years old and older. The people who answered our study and the survey questions were very close to what Pennsylvania residents look like in terms of age distribution and that type of stuff. One of the interesting things about this one is that a lot of studies are done statewide. But in this case, what we did for you all is that we did it on a wildlife management unit by wildlife management unit. Because, yeah, it's important to know what Pennsylvania residents think as a whole, but what do they think in 3B or 4A or whatever it is? So we built the study sort of from the ground up. It's called a stratified sample. Now, of course, when we put all of that information together to look at what statewide information was, it was weighted, of course, and it's pretty standard things that we do. But it's all done by unit by unit. It's a scientific survey. It's a probability-based survey. It was primarily telephone, but if we could not get people by the phone, we could text them, or if they wanted to do it by email, we could do it by email as well. So again, really good representation of what was out there. If they weren't home the first time, we called them afterwards, and another sort of different day, different time of the week, or whatever it is. We did 150 interviews per WMU, and when you put it all together, the sampling error on a statewide basis is less than 2 percentage points. So if I say 50% think this, it's really somewhere between 52 and 48%. It's actually a little bit less than that. As I discussed, we did it by WMU, and we primarily did that by zip code. So it was pretty intense in terms of developing the overall sample. So, blah, blah, blah. What did we find out? That's what we really want to know. But again, I think it's important to talk about that because, again, there's so many studies out there that just aren't reflective of what's really out there. I just read a study literally within the past 2 days. You don't really do a lot of it here because you're not a sort of saltwater fishery, but the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration does a study every couple of years on marine fishing. And they've been doing it for years, and they spend millions of dollars on it. But new analysis on that showed that they think that was overestimating catch by 30 to 40%. I see some head nodding. Can you imagine that? You're catching 100 fish. Well, maybe it was 130. Well, we don't know. You're killing 50,000 deer. Well, maybe it was 100. We don't know. So again, methodology really is important. And again, you've got great methodologists within the commission to keep you honest with Corn and others. What did we find out? First thing we did is we looked at Pennsylvania residents, general population residents' attitudes toward hunting and trapping. The good news is that Pennsylvania residents approve of legal regulated hunting, and it's pretty high. And let's take a look at that in terms of that. Upwards of 83% agree and support legal regulated hunting. Now, over the years, over the past 30 years, we've actually been keeping trends on the American public and their attitudes toward hunting. A whole bunch of things. There's not a lot good about getting old, but the cool part is you do a lot of trends and you remember what's happening. You can put some of this stuff in perspective. But while 83% of Pennsylvania residents support hunting, we actually detected a slight decline. So, a couple percent, 2-3%, well, it was statistically significant. Should we worry about it? Well, let's see. You might go to the doctor and say, hey, your blood pressure's a little high, but maybe it was because you didn't exercise the day before or you ate a lot of salt or whatever it is. And that's why we do this study for you. I think this is the 4th time we've done this. This is a trend study. It first started in 03, 11, 14, 18, 19, and then 2023. So we're able to keep the pulse on you on what Pennsylvania residents think over the years. But again, over 50% of Pennsylvania residents in all of the WMUs, except for that 5D, had strong support. So the support is there. We saw a little bit of a decline. We're going to take a look in 2-3 years and see what's happening. Now, in and of itself, should we worry about that? Well, the good news is I've done lots of studies this past year, one in Washington for the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, Oregon Fish and Wildlife, Arizona Game and Fish, Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation, Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, and Vermont. I detected declines in all of those states. Then we did a national study about 2 months ago on Americans' attitudes toward hunting, something I've been doing since 1994, and I also detected a decline. So the question is, what's going on? We're going to be looking into that. I think we should monitor that. But I think it's interesting because it's the first time in 30 years that I've seen sort of all these drops across the board. Now, we've seen those things with Cecil the Lion. You remember Cecil the Lion? We saw things drop, and they went right back up again the year after. But the fact that I've seen this in so many different states makes me think, let's keep an eye on it. So just to know that. I have a book that I wrote called How to Talk About Hunting Research-Based Communication Strategies, that if you're interested, we've compiled all sorts of research over the years and gives you very specific information on what to do, what words to say, how to debate and debate tactics and things like that. But if you're interested, I can get you copies of that for free. So anyway, so let's move on in terms of attitudes toward trapping. We also saw a little bit of a decline. Again, a couple percentage points, but when you look at it from a statistical standpoint, it was statistically significant. So the reason I put maybe declining in here is because we only had 2 points. If I had 8 or 9 points and I saw a trend, but we're not sure. It was a few points different from the last time that we did it. And so let's take a look. Again, good news is that 6 out of 10 Pennsylvania residents approve of regulated trapping. And the reason that we call it regulated, words really matter. That 3 years ago or so, we did a major project with the Wildlife Management Institute called Conservation Words That Work. And we looked at how the public sort of reacts to different words, and words that work and words that don't work, and words that alienate people. But that's why we talk about legal regulated hunting. We talk about regulated trapping, because a lot of Pennsylvania residents don't even know that you regulate trapping, upwards of 25%. 1 out of every 4 people out there as you walk around tonight and go to a restaurant don't even know that you regulate trapping. So when you ask somebody about, well, do you support trapping? It's like, well, I don't know. So are they keeping an eye on it? So anyways, we did have 60% approval in all WMUs except 2B, 3D, 4C, and 5D. Again, that's going to mean something more to you when you start looking at the results. But we know from 2019 to 2023, overall approval dropped by 6 percentage points, from 66 to 60%, while overall disapproval remains steady. So something's going on out there. I've got a lot of ideas and hypotheses that we'll hopefully in a couple years come back to you on, but something toward sort of watching. What do people think of deer, sort of the primary species out there? Well, one of the ways that we ask that is we ask, do you think that populations in your area are too high, just about right, or too low, or don't you know? And in general, Pennsylvania residents think that populations as they stand right now are just right. And we've seen that. And that's a cool part about doing this now for 4 or 5 times, is that when you look at those trends, I'm pointing out differences of 3, 4, 5 percentage points. But when you look at it, things are relatively steady. And I think that's a sort of a sign of a good study. If things were all over the place every single time, that's probably reflective of your change in methodology and not just changes in residents' attitudes. But let's take a look at that graph, where we ask, in your opinion, is the deer population where you live too high, just right, or too low? And again, really similar over the years with just about right, sort of that sweet spot at 52% in 2023. But we did have some variations. But again, these are variations on that theme that most people think that it's about right. But wildlife management units with 30% saying it was too high, you can read those, 1B, 2A, 2B, 2C, 2D, and 3B. And then we also had some WMUs saying that it was too low. And then from 2011 to 2023, too high did increase from 20 to 27%. So you had a 7% increase there. And let me show you on a map, because I'm a really visual person. But in this case, you sort of just did it by region. That sort of that pink, red, that 30% or more saying that it was too high. Sort of that purple down at the bottom, 30% or more saying too low. And then those other ones, that sort of that gray area in central, we actually had some county or some units where people, 30% said too high and 30% said too low. My point here is I really want to interest you in taking and looking at that report because, yeah, statewide is important, but I know each of you manages and is responsible for different regions and stuff. That information is in there. The other thing that's in there that I didn't have enough time to present that's really cool is we developed these things called super graphs for you, that I can take this question and say, well, who are the people who actually think that populations are too high? And we can go down by age, by gender, by race, by region, by unit. And you can look down and say, wow, look at that. Look how men differ from women, or older individuals think different than younger people. So there's just a ton of information in there. One of the cool things is that Pennsylvania residents are split on deer feeding. And that goes right into that it was so interesting that there was huge differences in age. Older individuals thought deer feeding was okay. Younger individuals didn't think so. But overall, general population, 42% agree that it's okay to feed deer, and 45% disagree. And I know that that's been talked about. It's like, what do people think out there? And it seems like people are split, and they are. 13% gave a neutral answer. 50% plus agree with deer feeding in those units that I've outlined there, 1A, 2D, 2E, 2G, 4A, and 4C. And then 50% disagree with deer feeding in those other units. And you can see those are going to be based on geography as well as urban-rural splits. From 2011 to 2023, the people that agree with feeding range from 42 to 44 and disagree from 45 to 47. I just haven't seen in literally 15 years on that topic, we just haven't seen a lot of movement one direction or the other. Yeah, not sure why, but that's sort of finding. How about attitudes toward elk? Just an amazing species. I kept waiting when somebody said that he was in Wyoming. I mean, what was everybody thinking? And the previous speaker, he's like, he's in Wyoming. It's like, everybody's like, he's elk hunting. Is that true? He had to have been elk hunting. He's fishing, but I bet he's elk hunting too. I don't know. Every time I go to Wyoming, I'm elk hunting. So let's talk about elk. Most Pennsylvania residents don't know elk are in Pennsylvania. Upwards of 62% of Pennsylvania residents don't know that there are elk in PA. And again, for us, we think, wow, how can that be? How can that be? But you've got people living in urban areas and large cities and that type of stuff that are out there. So upwards of over almost 2/3 of Pennsylvania residents don't know there's elk. 40% plus of Pennsylvania residents in all the WMUs except 3C, 3D, 5C, and 5D know there are elk, so a little bit more knowledge there. And then over the past couple days when I was looking at this and deciding what to present and talking to staff, this was the strangest result. From 2019 to 23, the percentage of Pennsylvanians who know that PA has wild elk decreased, and decrease was statistically significant from 46 to 38%. And if they knew a few years ago, why don't they know now? Now we're doing studies. We're doing a really major study similar to this up in Maine, and Maine has had, since pre-COVID, they've had huge numbers of people move in. Maine looks very different than a few years ago. And even though Pennsylvania has sort of had a pretty steady emigration type of population change, there are new people coming in and moving out. So even though you haven't had these huge increases or huge decreases, the state does look different than a few years ago. But also, again, these are things sometimes I don't know, as being from Virginia on this one, is that I don't, was there a lot more information out there in 2019 than there was this past year or what? But it was one of those ones where I looked at it and I can't explain it to you. Maybe I should have just not showed it and you would have been like, well, he doesn't know. But there's got to be some reasons for that because, again, these surveys are pretty exacting in terms of something is going on. Again, people are busy, and maybe pre-COVID they were doing different things or something. Maybe there was more information out there at the time that we were doing it. How about attitudes toward bear? Let's take a look at that. Again, one of the things, this is what we call a cultural carrying capacity study. Do people think there's just too many, too few, or just right? Bear populations are just right for most Pennsylvania residents. You can see that, and everything else is a variation on that theme. People are just like, well, yeah, I think it's pretty good, just right. too high for a few, too low. One of the trends that we did pick up from 2019 to 2021 was that just right declined, and too low increased from 19 to 25%. So there still is sort of an appetite for more bears in some of the regions. And that's what this map is looking at in terms of, we sort of color-coded it, the pinkish red, it was supposed to be red, that 19% or more is saying it was too high, the green there under 30% saying it's too high or too low. Again, that can vary from unit to unit. And then the gray, 30% or more is saying too low. But let's look at not only if people think that there's enough of bears out there, but do they support or oppose black bear hunting? Now again, we saw that most Pennsylvania residents support black bear hunting, unlike some other states where I've done this around here, in New Jersey and others. But 55% support, 30% oppose, and 15% give a neutral answer. So again, almost twice as many Pennsylvania residents support black bear hunting. That you'll see in the demographics, that's very urban, rural related, it's age related, and it's gender related. Some of the differences are pretty amazing. There is sort of geographic differences. 50% opposition to black bear hunting occurs only in WMU, Wildlife Management Unit 5D. And then from 2019 to 2023, support for black bear hunting declined from 64 to 55%. So we had about a 9-point decrease. So again, we're seeing that again with hunting in general, black bear hunting, and trapping. But 9% is substantial. Perhaps anything else on the study? We got lots of calls on this from staff, and would you run this, would you run that? That was attitudes toward the reintroduction of the American marten, formerly called the pine marten. We started out not with marten per se, specific question, but just in general, do Pennsylvania residents support restoring native species? And they do, overwhelmingly. Look at that number there. I mean, that some sort of information talks to you, and some information and some graphs yell at you. Upwards of 70% of Pennsylvania residents. I mean, in this day and age, you can't get 70% to agree on almost anything. Yet, 70% plus 73% either strongly supported or moderately supported that in terms of restoring species that were once native to Pennsylvania but have been extirpated or completely removed back into the state. And again, so many people support that. And then you only have 11%, really only 1 out of every 10 Pennsylvania residents saying, yeah, I don't support restoring species that were once here but no longer are. How about the marten itself? We did explain afterwards. We asked if they were aware of marten being here, and there's some other lead-up questions to that. But we did ask Pennsylvania residents if they supported or opposed marten reintroduction. So there was a preamble to this. Upwards of 80% of Pennsylvania residents either strongly or moderately supported the efforts to bring the American marten back to Pennsylvania, and you only had less than 8% opposing or strongly or moderately opposing. I like to ask people questions and then give them either a neutral or a don't know, because some people truly don't know, and I don't like forcing people into that. But I know that that question has been asked by others in Pennsylvania, and if you take the don't knows and such out, and if you only consider support or opposition, it's about 91% support, 9% oppose, which is almost dead on with other surveys that I've seen on that topic in Pennsylvania. Okay, awareness of wildlife diseases, getting down to the end here. What do Pennsylvania residents know about some of these wildlife diseases? What do they not know? Are they concerned about them? It varies dramatically. 13% are familiar with white nose syndrome. 75% had just never heard of it. Let's skip to the bottom there. 17% are familiar with rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus. 81%, 8 out of 10 Pennsylvania residents are not familiar. But yet with West Nile virus, which most of us have heard about, 73% are familiar with it. 9% had not heard about it. So we have some varying degrees in there. So some knowledge, others not so much. And then finally, let's take a look at attitudes toward the commission itself. We've been involved, Wildlife Management Institute, with Wildlife Management Institute and other organizations, a guy named Dan Decker from Cornell University, Cindy Jacobson, who used to work for the Fish and Wildlife Service, in working with states on the whole idea of relevancy. You know, are we as relevant now as we were in the 1970s? And so we've worked with a number of states, Rhode Island, we're going to do South Carolina, Florida, Ohio. We did a major study in Ohio, Oklahoma, Nevada, and other states in terms of how relevant is that agency to its residents, all of their residents. And a lot of these questions are sort of getting at that. Now, one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to present you some results, but I'm not going to present everything because we just don't have enough time. But there's a lot of don't knows in these questions, so I don't want you to be too concerned. We asked 3 separate questions about whether the staff cares about wildlife, whether you effectively balance the interest of hunters, conservation groups, and the general population, and whether or not that scientific or wildlife methods serve as the primary guide for your work. And all of the results in this sort of this dabble into relevancy and agency support are really good. So they're really good on one hand if you just look at the people who answered that they knew something. On the other hand, you've got a chunk of people out there, you know, upwards of a third or so, 25% or so people who just don't know what we do. And so and that's a good thing, because I could say, well, the more they know you, the more they like you. That's a good thing, right? We all know people, the more you know them, the less you like them. But in this case, this is really good. You're sort of like that cousin or that guy, the uncle or the aunt who comes over and, hey, I really like them, but I don't know a whole lot about them. What do they do? Where do they live? So there's good news here in terms of big picture, but you've got a chunk who doesn't know a lot about you. 65% agree that the staff really cares about wildlife. That does not mean the opposite, that 30 whatever percent think that you don't. It means that a chunk of those people just don't know. 59% agree that the commission effectively balances the interest of hunters and conservation groups. Again, only about 9 or 10% said that you don't. And in the previous one, only about, I think it was about 8 or 9% said that you agree with, that they disagreed that you really care about wildlife. So again, I want you to look at the opposite and say, oh no, the people who don't think we care because they just don't know. And then finally, about half of Pennsylvania residents agree that scientific wildlife methods serve as the primary guide for the work of the commission. But again, just 10% disagree. So when you get them, you're doing a great job, but there's lots of people out there that we're still not reaching. So anyways, that's a really quick overview of a really major study. I hope I interest you in getting that. Everything's color-coded. If you only care about the Northeast region or the Southeast region or whatever it is, we've cross-tabulated the data by wildlife management unit, by region, and then by different demographic groups. So it's all in there. So covered a lot of ground, but I know most time was limited and you want to get me off and go hear something else. But I certainly would be glad to answer any questions, methodological questions or anything like that. We've done this for a long time. We do about 50 projects like this a year for the wildlife management community, from hunting and fishing and trapping and everything in between. I guess you don't really care about manatees up here and don't care about Pacific salmon, so we can put those off the table. Wolves, but certainly be glad to answer anything, or you can send me home.
We, commissioners, get a copy of this presentation?
Absolutely, yeah. I did email that to Corin beforehand, so absolutely get a copy of that.
Do you
I'd
ever,
also like to get a copy of the book that you mentioned regarding the wildlife communication, hunting communication.
Absolutely, absolutely. I will get you those too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mark, I would love it if you would prepare something for us that talks about your agency. We have a lot of people that seriously question the integrity of the surveys that are done. And I think if we had something that could, for example, be published in newspapers, be put online, that talks about your agency, how you do it, that you're a national agency, you're not tied to the Game Commission, that you're totally independent. Some of the things that you mentioned, like these political surveys that you had done and the success rate there, because like I said, we have a lot of naysayers that just totally don't believe the results of what you have given us.
People don't like pollsters? Wait, this is the first time I've ever heard this.
Well, we would
Sometimes
love.
they joke that in the 2020 election, some people didn't like Biden, some people didn't like Trump, but everybody hated the pollsters. So, of course, yeah, and I'd be glad to do that. And I'm not trying to be not serious, but absolutely, whenever you do studies, you do studies on hunting, on Sunday hunting, or whatever it might be that we deal with on controversial issues, and we find something. Here's a perfect example, just because sometimes it's good to take it out of that. We did a study just a few months ago, maybe it was last year, on Sunday hunting in Maine. Maine is one of the remaining states that doesn't have Sunday hunting. I'm a survey researcher. I'm a wildlife biologist. My background, I'm a certified wildlife biologist, social scientist. So I have a hardcore background, but I also have a graduate degree from Yale University in social science and conservation issues and policy and how to conduct these things. So anyway, and I'm a hunter. I don't know if that matters or not, but anyways, but all of that aside, nothing matters except the science. You do scientific research. But at some point, somebody's not going to like your results. In Sunday hunting was a perfect example of that. Everybody wants Sunday hunting, and the hunters want Sunday hunting. But when you do a scientific survey on hunters, general population, and landowners, and upwards of half of the landowners say that they're going to close their land. In Maine, you can go in and hunt everywhere if it's not posted. But when half of your landowners, 50% of your landowners say that they're going to close their lands to hunting, they're going to post them, if the Maine Department of IFW, Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, is going to institute Sunday hunting, and you present that, people are like, oh, you're stupid. Your poll is stupid because there should be Sunday hunting. And I'm here saying, look, I don't make policy. There's a great quote that says, science seeks questions, policy demands answers. I'm doing science. You all have the hard job of doing policy and making decisions from that. But we're here. I get to do work for you. I appreciate work for you. I can assure you that everything we do is neutral. Do you support or oppose? Do you agree, disagree? I don't have view. I have my own views, but you separate those views as a scientist and a researcher to give you the best data possible. And so I know what you're talking about with the last study we did for you. People are like, oh, there wasn't enough people or this or that. But always remember that there's a couple things. One is the science credible? Is the study credible? But also, are these people who are complaining that their candidate didn't win? That they didn't get what they wanted, and all of a sudden it's not, well, 2/3 of people said this or whatever, but it's that, oh no, that survey stinks, it's not right.
Yeah.
It's not
Mark, I'm not questioning
Yeah,
your
I know.
integrity. All I want is something maybe like
Yep.
2 pages that we can get out there, get on social media, get in the newspapers, that type of thing that,
Yeah.
This is a legitimate study.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate you allowing me to talk about it, because I know, because you all ask questions, you dig into the data, you dig into the methodology, and you know what we do. But again, I like people digging into the data and digging into methodology, so I very much appreciate that. Thank you. Cool. Any other questions?
Hey, one final question. When was the last time you had somebody that agreed with your findings but questioned your methodology in the same manner that people question your methodology that don't agree with your outcome? To Commissioner Mittrick's point, we can educate people so much, right? And the data's out there, the track record is there. So whatever we can do to make it easy for them to understand what it means to be statistically valid, I think we would all appreciate that and push it as much as we can.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. You have a really hard job. I mean, you have almost an impossible job compared to a private business. As an agency, you have to sort of be all things to all people. How do you do that with limited resources of deer or seasons and stuff? But that's sort of your goal. Your goal is to make everybody happy. If in a business situation, they don't have to make everybody happy. They just have to make, a few people happy. I fly. I used to be pre-COVID. I flew a lot. I gathered up 3 million miles with Delta. So I buy a ticket and somebody else buys a ticket. They're going to upgrade me immediately because they know I'm giving them thousands of dollars worth of business a year. They're making me happy. I bought the same $300 ticket as the dude in coach. I get to sit in first class. He's like, this isn't right. That's easy for Delta to make that decision because they know I'm going to come back and back and back again. For you, it's hard. It's really hard because again, you have to be all things to all people, and it's pert near. I'm from first, so it's a pert near an impossible task. But as you look at that data, sometimes you don't have to be all things to all people. There are things that you can do in terms of segmentation and things like that as well. So, but yeah, I appreciate the comments and the kind words, and be glad to do that. So thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Looks like there's a lot of note-taking going on, so I'm going to give you guys a moment or so. But whenever you're ready. Okay. Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm here today to provide some background on your consideration of listing black rail in Pennsylvania. In 2020, the Eastern Black Rail was federally listed as threatened. And following our own internal guidance, we would mirror that listing and list the black rail as threatened in Pennsylvania. But I'm willing to go out on a limb and guess that most of you are not that familiar with black rails. So I'm going to take just a second and give you a micro course in black rail and then come back to the listing question. Black rail is our smallest and most secretive rail. Its habit of living in marshes and being fairly nocturnal make it the epitome of a secretive marsh bird. You can see the individual here is sooty black with a bright red eye, but you're often not going to see that unless you're out in the marsh in the middle of the night, which most of us don't spend a lot of time doing that. They're small birds, about the size of a bluebird or a quarter the size of a mourning dove. And in addition to that, they are relatively rare in Pennsylvania. I should tell you that we have no confirmed nests in Pennsylvania. To confirm a nest, we have to find it with eggs or young in the nest or find very young nestlings. Despite that, we do have evidence of strong evidence of nesting in the state. During the first breeding bird atlas, we had males on territory singing in 2 different counties. And in 2020, during our secretive marsh bird survey, we had a bird that was detected in Jefferson County. But beyond that, it's scattered records over many years. And then we also have late summer, early fall records that are probably individuals migrating through the state. Given that these birds are relatively rare, you might be wondering where they are in Pennsylvania. They're birds that we find in emergent wetlands. These green dots on the map represent emergent wetlands in Pennsylvania. So you can see they're spread across the state and in all regions in the state. But the stronghold of black rail nesting sites are along the coastal plains. So when we narrow down these wetlands, we're looking for ones that mimic the sorts of marshes we find along the coast. We're looking for marshes that are relatively small, that have an open matrix around them. So think grazed cattle pastures where the vegetation outside the marsh is very short, and the marshes themselves are surrounded by short emergent vegetation, things like sedges and rushes. Again, they're just mimicking what we see when we go to the coast, what those wetlands look like. Now, just to wrap it back around quickly, the things we should consider when we're thinking about whether to list black rails or not really are represented by 3 considerations. Those are that it would help us remain transparent. We'd be mirroring the federal listing and following our own guidance. We'd be improving consistency across the states. As the federal government is working on a recovery plan for the rail, it would be much easier for them to develop the plans when they know they get consistent treatment across the states. And the third consideration, which is not a biological consideration, but is that, oh yeah, good. Sorry, it looked like on the screen here we jumped ahead, is actually a human consideration, and that's that there are so few birds on the landscape in Pennsylvania that we're estimated to have up to 5 breeding pairs, that there would be very few conflicts between humans and birds in relation to listing these birds. And I would be glad to take any questions or either about black rails or the implications of listing if you would like.
Could we be a victim of our own success in 5 or 10 years? Would we see more PNDI hits that maybe could be an issue with farmers and grazing cattle?
It absolutely is a possibility, but highly unlikely. Think about wetlands in general. They already receive a certain amount of protection, but the real threat we think right now for black rails as a species is actually ocean rise, because most of our birds are on the coast right now. And when I say our birds, I mean not just Pennsylvania's birds, but the species as a whole. And so we could get birds moving into the state, but even so, if we went up by an order of magnitude, you'd still be talking about 50 pairs of birds and 50 marshes that only are about 3 acres apiece. So it'd still be a relatively small, and that's being really optimistic.
Thank you.
Sure.
Just an educational question. Why didn't we adopt the federal regulations as an agency, or what was the history there? Just that there were no birds in Pennsylvania?
I think it was just an oversight because the records are so far
Okay.
and few and in between. Yes, exactly. Excellent. All right. If you don't know how to contact me, I'm easy to find in the directory. So anytime you have any questions, just let me know.
Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon. My name is Emily Boyd. I'm the small game mammal biologist at the Bureau of Wildlife Management, here to present a proposed draft of Pennsylvania's first snowshoe hare management plan. So unlike the black bear plan that will be presented in a couple of minutes here, this is the first, and so for snowshoe hares. And I kind of wanted to take a step back and give you all like Bio 101 snowshoe hares. Why do we now have a snowshoe hare management plan proposed for the state of Pennsylvania? Snowshoe hares are a winter specialist. They're one of about 20 species in the entire world that transitions to white in winter, and they do that for camouflage with a snow cover background. In addition, they also have disproportionately large hind feet, about 5 inches in length, that help them move easily across snow cover. And that makes a lot of sense for where snowshoe hares are readily found across the northern tier of North America. We in Pennsylvania exist pretty much on the southeastern extent of that species distribution. In Pennsylvania, our habitat is different than the boreal forests of Canada. Inherently, we have deciduous forests, mixed forests. We do not have as much of a coniferous component. So inherently, there's some habitat differences that hares in Pennsylvania would be using compared to their northern populations. This figure is from the the National Land Cover data set, and you can see by the light green color that these are deciduous. Sorry, that figure might not be showing up quite as well. A dark green would be representing evergreen or conifer forests. In addition, snow varies across Pennsylvania's landscape. But most of our snow comes in the northern latitudes and also at higher elevations, so not necessarily across the full landscape as you would expect across that northern tier of North America. And that maps pretty well along with where we think snowshoe hares have been within the Commonwealth. Now, as we've started to get into looking at snow dynamics and thinking about the implications for a species like snowshoe hare in Pennsylvania, we've actually pulled some weather station data available from NOAA. I'm going to show an example here from Warren, Pennsylvania. This is the annual variation in snow cover duration in Warren, Pennsylvania. And you can see that while over time we don't necessarily see an overall increase or decrease, we certainly see quite a bit of variation. I highlighted here a dip of 40 days in one year to almost 100 days in the year immediately after that. And why that matters for a species like snowshoe hares is that snowshoe hares cannot control when they transition from brown to white in fall and then from white to brown in spring. So in a year where they only have 40 days of snow cover, that's actually quite a long time that they would be in mismatch, a white hare on a brown background. Research in other snowshoe hare populations have found that the species, when in mismatch, can have upwards of 7% higher weekly mortality rate compared to a hare that is actually in camouflage and matches its background. But fortunately for us as managers, there has been some research that's shown that disadvantage can be mitigated by specific habitat conditions at broad enough scales. So habitat management really is our best chance at managing for this species. And just to give you some visuals of mismatch, there's a hare in this picture. Hopefully it took you a little bit to find it. That's what you want. You want to be camouflaged against your background. Similar, there's actually a hare in this picture too. It's found kind of a fine scale habitat feature to hide out in during the day and hopefully avoid predators. But you can certainly see how a hare that's white on a brown background might be easier for a predator to pick off. The agency, in cooperation with the Wildlife Research Unit at Penn State, had a grad student, which about 10 years ago, that had a first look really at the species in Pennsylvania. We're hands-on capturing, monitoring survival of the species, and we had some pretty amazing findings, honestly, where compared to northern populations, we had greater annual survival than the studied populations in the north. We had larger body size. We had lower hair density. The pelt, the guard hairs that turn white in winter are less dense, as well as the underfur. That makes sense. We're warmer here in Pennsylvania than the northern populations. And we also had larger home range sizes. Overall, though, we still saw a similar preference for habitat with high woody stem density at about 9 feet. So we did have some similarities, but certainly some differences. And with this picture, I just wanted to show kind of the implications of that lower density pelt hair. It's complicated with snowshoe hares versus hare, but on the left here, we have pretty nice stark white snowshoe hare, and on the right is what we were finding with our Pennsylvania snowshoe hares, where that brown underfur does stick through a bit more. In addition to that, for the first time in any available literature, we documented brown ears and brown eye rings in a snowshoe hare population, which we were certainly surprised to find. And, I went backwards. We also, to some extent, have brown snowshoe hares in winter. This is a very small percent of hares that were captured in this project, but certainly surprise findings that from as we start to look into the species more and more. The Bureau of Wildlife Management monitors our game species using an annual game take survey. And like those other game species, we also have been monitoring the activities of our snowshoe hare hunters. Where are they hunting? How many days are they afield? And how many hares are they harvesting? And from this survey in 1983 to 1989, that figure on the left, you can kind of see those darker counties are where more hares are being harvested. Time period 1997 to 2002, a little bit over 10 years after that time period, you see somewhat of a contraction in where hares are being reported as harvested via this survey. And why am I showing you data from about 20 years ago? With this survey, we've now transitioned to a broader geographic scale, these wildlife management units. And in the last 10 years using this survey, we do not have a single wildlife management unit in Pennsylvania that has reported a snowshoe hare harvest every single year. So now our wildlife management units are blipping in and out. And in part, that's because as overall hunter numbers have declined, our small game hunters have dropped off at an even quicker rate, and we just really never had a lot of snowshoe hare hunters to begin with. We have a short season in Pennsylvania. It's a species that has somewhat of a restricted range historically. All that somewhat contributes to likely a lower participation in snowshoe hare hunting overall. And you can see from the red line indicated here that general decline in snowshoe hare hunters in Pennsylvania. In addition to habitat and mismatch concerns for this species, we now have the threat of RHDV2. This figure shows the western states where it's basically now endemic to many of the wild rabbit, hare, jackrabbit, lagomorph populations in western United States, and has been popping up in many of the eastern states as well in domestic. We detected it ourselves in August of 2022. We have an RHDV2 management plan as an agency. Fortunately, we were just a few weeks ago, we dissolved RHD-DMA1 because we were able to contain that RHDV2 to the domestic and it did not spread into the wild. So that brings us to, hopefully that's enough background for why we have a snowshoe hare management plan. The plan has 4 goals, where we want to first maintain our snowshoe hare populations within their existing distribution. And we also want to better develop tools that help us to monitor this species, especially in light of like the declining hare hunter numbers, that we need a better monitoring method to understand what's going on with our snowshoe hare populations. We also want to improve our habitat management and to support snowshoe hares. So similar to projects like what Tim presented earlier, we're certainly grasping hold of trying to engage with staff on projects like that with hares and squirrels and everything, but understand how hares respond to our habitat management activities. Can we improve those habitat management activities to benefit a species like snowshoe hares? But also, can we better understand the species itself and understand where, if there might be a priority area? Do we have a connectivity issue in our remaining hare populations? Can we better place our habitat management on the landscape? We want to continue to provide our snowshoe hare harvest opportunities, in part because hunting has been our longest monitoring tool for the species. But obviously, we also have the mission of the Game Commission to keep in mind. But within that, we also want to better understand any potential impacts of hunting on this species. And we also want to increase public knowledge of snowshoe hares and their management. Certainly, the previous presentation presented on many people don't necessarily know that we have elk. Snowshoe hares are even more elusive. They don't have a nice, beautiful visitor center dedicated to them. So we want to make sure that people are aware of this species, but really focusing in on habitat management, engaging with private landowners, our sister agencies, the federal agencies, to promote habitat management that benefits hares and many other species as well. So, we have the 4 goals, and we've prepared a draft management plan, which has now gone through our internal review process that will be I am presenting it to you here today for you to consider to approve for release of a 60-day review period, after which point we would put all the comments together from the public and present hopefully a final draft. If approved for release, we would present a final draft of that management plan at the January meeting. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right. Hi, everybody. I am last but certainly not least. My name is Emily Carollo. I'm the Black Bear Program Manager for the Pennsylvania Game Commission. And today I am here to present our updated Black Bear Management Plan that will be running from 2024 to 2029. As Emily already mentioned, this is going to be the second draft of a management plan for Pennsylvania. There was a previous management plan that ran from 2006 to 2015. So I am super excited to be able to present this updated version to you today. So this is an 80 to 90 page document. It is very long, and so what I really wanted to cover with you guys today are the biggest changes that I think are most important for you to all to be aware about, and also for the public to be aware about as well. First and foremost, we have changed our previous plan that was 10 years, and we've switched to a 5-year plan. And all of these changes I'll go over in the next couple of slides as to why they're significant and why they're important. We also added a 5th goal. So our previous 4 goals in the previous management plan pretty much relatively remained the same and carried over into this current management plan, but we added a 5th goal as well. And then last but not least, we added a lot of new information and citations, research into the main body of the text of the Black Bear Management Plan that covers black bear biology and black bear management strategies. And again, we'll get into a little bit more as to why that's important in a couple of slides. So first and foremost, switching from a 10-year plan to a 5-year plan. Black bears are an incredibly culturally relevant, culturally important species here in Pennsylvania. This is true throughout most of the black bear range. And so the previous plan was 10 years long, and when you think about it, a decade is a long time. And a lot of things change within that decade. Our first plan came out in 2006, like I mentioned previously, and we're 15 years from there. You know, it's been a while. And so the plan is to be able to have this shorter length of time applied to this current plan and continue that 5-year interval of really updating our management plan so we can be dynamic, flexible, and malleable and make sure we can address the ever-changing needs of black bears, and really this applies to a lot of different wildlife species, but black bears in particular. So before I get into the 5th goal, I just wanted to again mention the previous 4 goals. I don't have them written out here, would have been a lot of text, but really they mainly deal with a population goal, a habitat goal, a human-bear conflict goal, and a recreational opportunity goal. Those goals from the previous plan really kind of relatively stayed the same. They might have had a word or 2 changed that was identified by our stakeholders and something that they were considering or thinking about. But long story short, we have those 4 goals. They remain the same. They're transferring over to this new management plan as well. And goals are very kind of overarching themes, right? They're relatively stable throughout time that we want to consider as a wildlife agency and a wildlife managing agency. So that's why they really haven't changed too much from the previous plan. All right, so what is our fifth goal? So this fifth goal, I think I am super excited about, mostly because I do enjoy thoroughly communicating with the public, doing outreach, teaching people about black bears. So our fifth goal is to increase the public's knowledge about black bears. It's specifically an education goal. And I think it was really interesting hearing about this responsive management survey and information about how the public views the Game Commission, but how much they know about some of the wildlife species that we manage. I can personally tell you, I grew up in New Jersey and had no idea that Pennsylvania had elk. So I think it's really interesting to identify how much of a knowledge gap, how much of an education gap we have with the public. So one of the main reasons why the stakeholders in our meeting that was held in May of 2022 identified this as an important goal to add to the plan is because in 2008, we actually also had a responsive management survey. And one of the questions asked to the public of Pennsylvania was, how much do you know about black bears? You know, I'm kind of getting at the gist of it. That might have been the exact wording. But 73% of Pennsylvanians identified that they knew little to nothing about black bears, which is really kind of crazy when you think about the fact that really 75% of Pennsylvania on the landscape is primary black bear range. And so we want to make sure that people either coming to Pennsylvania, have been living in Pennsylvania for generations, understand the species that they potentially may be interacting with on a daily basis depending on where they live in the state. And so this new goal that was identified by the stakeholders, I think, is going to be a really great and important addition to this updated management plan. And last but not least, we added, like I mentioned before, a lot of new research. Since the last management plan, both Pennsylvania and many other parts throughout the black bear range here in North America have done a ton of research on black bear biology and black bear management, black bear hunting seasons, human bear conflict. I mean, the list goes on. And so keeping that information up to date is super important within the body, that main body of the text of the management plan, because it provides a resource and an outlet for the public to, again, almost help accomplish our fifth goal, right, of educating the public and giving them information that's current, it's representative of the black bear population, and I think really helps the public understand where we come from when we start making management decisions regarding black bears. So those are the three main things that changed in our updated black bear management plan, but I did want to mention a couple other of initiatives that have kind of been incorporated into this management plan. First and foremost is we did get approval for a statewide survival project on black bears. I am super excited about this project. It's going to be GPS and collaring a lot of black bears throughout the state. It's actually really the first of its kind. We've done larger scale studies on black bears throughout Pennsylvania, but not at this broad of a scale. We're going to be using and working with a lot of different wildlife management staff throughout the state, and it's going to provide a lot of information to be able to bolster our management decisions. And really, this is kind of an expansion of a recently completed study. It was done in the Sproul State Forest looking at female black bear harvest vulnerability and survival. So it's a bit of an expansion of that, but also an expansion of some of the new population monitoring models that we've been building and research that we've been doing as well with some external researchers. So with that being said, this rolls also into some new initiatives looking at updating our black bear population monitoring techniques. As technology improves, as we get better at understanding how to incorporate this technology and things like thousands and thousands of GPS locations into population models, we've really been able to build better estimates and better ways of estimating population and harvest parameters. And so, like I said, we've been working with some external researchers trying to figure out some new ways that we can possibly better monitor the population here in Pennsylvania. And then last but not least, probably one of my favorite things to mention is there is a lot of information regarding a program called BearWise in the updated black bear management plan as well, including some objectives and strategies looking to really utilize this tool to help mitigate human bear conflict. And just so everybody has a little bit of a background, BearWise is an online resource. It was created by biologists, black bear biologists and managers in the southeastern part of the United States. And really what they identified was they wanted a consistent, clear, concise message for the public to be able to learn about black bears and specifically how to prevent human black bear conflict. They wanted people in Tennessee visiting the Smoky Mountains all the way down to Florida and visiting the Everglades to see the same messaging. So the points that they were making to prevent human black bear conflict and why that's important were very similar and the messaging never changed. So they created Bearwise. It's an online resource. And essentially, once this online resource came out, a lot of other bear managers in other states said, this is great. I want this in my state. And instead of being managed by CAFWA, which is the Southeastern American Fisheries and Wildlife Association, it moved to the national organization of AFWA. And now multiple different states are Bearwise member states. Actually, I believe it's up to 39 at this point, Pennsylvania being one of them. So I'm really excited to implement Bearwise at a much broader scale and kind of use this tool to really help prevent one of the main issues that we often face with black bear populations, especially like those in the state of Pennsylvania that are very successful and quite large. So as Emily already kind of mentioned and went over a little bit, but really what we're asking for today is we have completed steps 1 and 2. We've prepared a draft management plan, and we've also run that draft management plan through our internal agency, so everyone's gotten a chance to review it and provide comments. And today we're asking the commissioners to release this plan as a draft to the public for a 60-day public comment period. Once we get these comments back, we'll go through all of them. We'll make any revisions if we need to make any revisions. And then in January, the plan would be to present a final draft of the plan to the commissioners for acceptance or possible revision. And so with that, I'd be happy to take any questions. All right, well, thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate your time, and thank you again for letting me present this updated management plan.
That concludes our agenda this afternoon. Thank you, everyone, for coming, and we will see you tomorrow morning at 8:30 to begin public comment for our quarterly commission meeting.